All right. We got some good news today. All right, I'll drop the country accent. But seriously, we got good news. YoshiP finally gave an interview about Final Fantasy 16, and oh boy, we got the goods, fellas. We really do. Oh man, let's get into it. And before I go on, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me out, and I greatly appreciate it. Thanks. And I really gotta give a good shout out to Gematsu, I'm sorry, for pretty much compiling all the places YoshiP Naoki Yoshida, for those who don't know, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, already know at this point who he is. All the places he's given interviews to. So right here, as you can see, all the English spots, Japanese spots, and the one German website. So, and they also did a good job of just compiling the information of all the, I guess, announcements, you could say. Yeah, they're technically announcements, but more like answers, honestly. He really gave out a lot of detail into what the game Final Fantasy 16 will entail. So let's get right to it and just go through the bullet points. I'll also link Gematsu's article right here down in the description below for y'all to read on your own. But let's go ahead and start with the first point. Protagonist Clive has an arsenal of powerful attacks and abilities based off traditional Final Fantasy summons, which can be cycled through in real time, enabling powerful combination attacks. After Clive claims an Eikon summon's power, he will be able to unlock its abilities in an ability tree, quote, through points earned in battle. Alright, so consider that like ability points, like AP points, like, this reminds me of the sphere grid from Final Fantasy X, but actually it's gotta be more like God of War, since he said skill tree or ability tree, so it's probably like you accumulate points, you use or buy different moves, and acquire them. However, going more into combat, YoshiP also notes details about the Eikon and Eikon Fights, which is really interesting over here. There will be times where the player controls an Eikon in real time, battling other Eikons. Each Eikon versus Eikon battle is unique. One may be reminiscent of a 3D shooter, while another may be more like a pro wrestling match, while a third may transform the entire arena into a battlefield. Each will have slight differences in user interface as well. Now, that sounds new. I don't remember a time where you used a summon to fight other summons, aside from like, when did we do that? When do you summon to, oh no, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Final Fantasy VIII, Guardian Forces, and what else? You fight other summoners in Final Fantasy X, but oh no, you do fight the summons in the Espers in Final Fantasy XII. So it is like a familiar trope in the series to fight summons, but I don't think you've ever became a summon to fight summons. You usually summoned like these Eikon type summons, Espers, Eidolons, whatever you want to call them, Aeons or whatever. But the interesting like tidbit here is that it's all unique, apparently. Like he says it right here, each Eikon versus Eikon battle is unique. That's interesting. I don't know what it's going to be like, but you know what? I'm actually excited for something like this. It's something completely new. I'm down to check this out. And moving on, next point. Clive will be accompanied by one or more companions for most of his journey, who will participate in battle, as well as banter with Clive. These party members will be AI controlled. Yeah. Now that's, oh god, that's so reassuring. I swear, this was probably one of the biggest sticking points for a lot of fans in this game. Like, the fact that it wasn't going to have a party, possibly, that was like, I guess it's like a third rail for Final Fantasy fans. I mean, if there's no party, that I'm not even gonna buy it. Like, that's probably how a lot of fans thought of it, I guarantee you. But actually, no, I did see a lot of Reddit threads for saying that, but I didn't know how, even though I made a video on that, I wasn't really sure how much of that would have deterred fans. It wasn't going to be an issue for people who would just pick this game up, who's played like probably 2 Final Fantasy games. So it was really the hardcore fan base that was on the fence about this. But hey, now we have party members. It's confirmed. So that's one less worry. But, you know, AI control party members, so basically like Final Fantasy 13. Yeah. And Final Fantasy 15. So that's kind of a bummer, but Clive is going to be an OP like protagonist from what he's described to be. Having multiple powers of summons, he's basically Noctis again. So for some of you, that's probably not a good thing, but you know, it's a different character. It's a different Final Fantasy, and it's, as far as development going for it, oh my god, it's like leagues better than the development history of Final Fantasy 15. So I'm still excited for this, even though I don't sound like I am, but I am for sure. Moving on. Okay, the wolf pup. Okay, this is a new one. Actually, no, we saw the wolf pup. The wolf pup from the first trailer is named Torgal. Now we have a name for it. As for whether Torgal will eventually play a role in combat, Yoshida said to, quote, wait and see. Let's just say, yeah. I'm excited to see that. We finally get a dog companion. That sounds awesome. It's kind of like in Fallout 4, dog meat. That's dog meat, right? Not the New Vegas? No, that's probably New Vegas dog. Whatever. That sounds cool. We get a dog. Yay. Creative Business Unit 3 chose a medieval fantasy style theme for Final Fantasy 16 because much of its core members, including Yoshida, simply enjoyed that style the most. Okay, I'll tell you what, I definitely miss that style the most because, man, aside from 14, no, I'm trying to remember the last time we got a full-blown Final Fantasy. As much as I want to say 10, there was a lot of modern tech there, so it's 1999, 23 years ago. Wow. No, wait. 9 came out in 2000. I'm getting my years mixed up. Correct me if I'm wrong down below in the comments, but I'm pretty sure it's 2000, so still 22 years ago. It's about time. This sounds awesome. I mean, the world seems pretty well developed, so yeah, I'm excited for that too. I'm also excited about this next point where he says, the game used an, quote, independent area-based game design that can give players a better feel of a truly, quote, global scale, and is not, I'm repeating that, open world. That is awesome. God, yes. I'm personally tired with the open world game designs for a lot of games. Listen, man, I get it. Everyone wants to emulate Grand Theft Auto's world design, but it's like they have their own sort of thing. They've mastered it. So, I know, it's a popular way to make games, but it's also an exhausting way to experience a game. Even though Elden Ring is technically open world, it's like segmented in weird ways. Like, there's honestly no clear objective in that game, which is what works in its favor. But I got tired of the Final Fantasy 15 experience pretty early on. As a matter of fact, I tried to finish that game as quickly as possible because it just was like so much empty space, man. It's beautiful to look at. I'm playing it again and I'm having some fun, but at the same time, it's like, you gotta be kidding me. Plus, I think the industry's like oversaturated with open world games, so personally, I'm in favor of this somewhat open world but not necessarily open world world they're building. But the weird thing is how they worded it. Independent area-based game design. What the hell does that even mean? Whatever. I'm sure, you know what? That's not a really complete thought, so moving on. The game will be a, quote, complete experience at launch, and there are currently no plans for other tertiary content. Holy crap, thank you. So, I'm going to assume this means no Final Fantasy 16 2. Thank God. Y'all remember when I said, I think we want a story that starts and ends, preferably in the same game. And I stand by that. Just make a game and move on to the next one. No more extra no DLC. I don't need any of that. Most people don't want to pay for any of that. And they just want to move on to the next Final Fantasy. I'm willing to bet that speaks for like 75 to like 90% of the fan base, especially the hardcore fan base. And this is why I think a lot of old-time fans really like where YoshiP is like heading with this franchise, where he's steering it. It's very reminiscent of Hironobu Sakaguchi. And for the record, Sakaguchi was also not a fan of sequels or spin-offs. So just wanted to point that out for anyone who's like, oh wait, why how come we don't get a sequel? Because we don't need one. We never needed one. That's like, it's unnecessary. Just move on to the next game. These games take forever to make. You guys know this, Square. Anyway, opinion aside, I actually want to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below if you like for mainline Final Fantasy games to have direct sequels, like 10-2, 13-2, 13-3, and stuff like that. Let me know, because it's not that I actually haven't played any of those sequel games, but I heard some good things about them, especially 13-2. But it's more like, if we never needed them in the first place, then why bother? Is my thoughts on it. So, anyways, moving on. Next point. Players will follow the life of Clive through 3 stages: his teens, his 20s, and his 30s. Okay, you know, that's like chronologically dynamic storytelling. I'm down with that. I like that. I personally like that. It's like different acts in like a play. So, and I think I've said this before, but Final Fantasy, when it's at its best, it's like a Shakespearean work of art. It really is. So the fact that we get to see our main character in his youth, in his young adulthood, and him like closing in his adulthood, not like an old man, but you know, medieval time setting in his 30s, he's probably got like maybe 20 years left on average. So anyway, next point. Final Fantasy 16 is currently fully playable from start to finish, but voiceovers in multiple languages still need to be recorded, and as it is a very action-oriented game, much playtesting is required to fine-tune difficulty, put the final touches on cutscenes, and for full-scale debugging. Yeah, sounds about right. So basically, they're almost done with the entirety of development for the game. So yeah, that sounds about where they would be, considering where their release window would be. I'm gonna guess my money is on March of 2023. March 20th or 19th. That would be awesome, because that's basically, if I recall, March 20th, 2020 was when Final Fantasy VII Remake was released. Maybe it was April. I'm not 100% sure. I have a feeling it was March though, because it was really close to Doom Eternal's release date. So actually, I'll just look it up. Too lazy to think about it. Alright, what is it? Oh, April 10th, 2020. Okay. Yeah, whatever. Still, said winter 2023, so March is spring. Ah well, whatever. We'll get it when we get it. I'm not, even if it's delayed, which I don't think this one will be. I'm pretty sure Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will be. But, you know, both of those games can't come out on time, can they? There's no way. One of them's got to be delayed. Anyway, let's get to the last point. And that is the one I least care about, honestly, and I'll explain why in just a bit. A third trailer is planned for release this fall, which will concentrate more on the world, lore, and storyline. Now, that probably sounds exciting for a lot of you. However, for me, I don't need no more info for this game. I'm already hooked. This game already has my money. YoshiP is a very trustworthy and reputable person in the industry, especially for Final Fantasy and Square Enix alike. So, just take my money at this point. Yeah, it's yours. Now, with all that being said, I just want to go to a couple of the different interviews Naoki Yoshida has had, and it's basically some specifics on specific let's see, aspects of Final Fantasy 16, like the combat, the companion, and what he thinks a Final Fantasy game should be. So let's just check those out real quick. And starting with GameInformer, their first question they asked, Final Fantasy has a history of experimenting with different combat systems and new mainline entries, and Final Fantasy 16 seems to be doing the same, with probably the heaviest emphasis on action in the mainline series yet. How did the team arrive on this style of combat, and what's it like seeing it come to life by way of combat director Ryota Suzuki, a designer whose credits include Devil May Cry 5, Dragon's Dogma, and Marvel vs. Capcom 2. My favorite Marvel vs. Capcom, actually. One of my favorite fighting games. It's like one of the best, honestly. Go play that if you ever get the chance. Alright, moving on. This is what YoshiP had to say. You asked me about the direction with the combat system, and so to answer that, in order to contribute to the overall evolution of Final Fantasy series, we decided that rather than building up on past Final Fantasy battle systems, that we instead shift our focus to one of real-time action. And so, once we had that concept down, that we were going to go in this direction, it made it easy for us for our director and our battle director, Ryota Suzuki, to take the reins and bring something that was truly action-focused. For the battle system, we've not only given the main character, Clive, an arsenal of powerful attacks and abilities based off of these traditional Final Fantasy summons, but we're allowing him to cycle through those attacks in real time, to deal those attacks in real time. This allows for powerful combinations and smooth, stylish gameplay that both looks and feels great. God, I love that. I love the fact that it's going to be stylish. Anyway, going back. An example of this is like you saw in that Dominance trailer, where you have one of the Garuda abilities where you lift the enemy up into the air, and then while in the air, Clive can switch to Titan and use one of the Titan abilities to pound the enemy into the ground. This kind of seamless switching and swapping of actions and chaining them together to create these unique combinations are all up to the players' different playstyles. There's lots of room for customizing these types of builds that Clive has, and the player finding a build that matches their playstyle is one of the fun things about the action system we have. Sorry, I feel like I butchered that last paragraph. Basically, he's the hybrid theory. He's basically sounding like he's either Dante or Nero, more like Dante from Devil May Cry 5, because he's basically has all these icons that he uses as weapons / abilities, which is basically the way Dante uses his weapons. His main weapon's not his firearms, although firearms you could be like the different kind of spells Clive can use while he has those icons equipped. That's how I picture it. Let me know how you guys think of how it'll turn out. A lot of our developers in our development team, Creative Business Unit 3, didn't have any experience creating an action game. It was very challenging for us. And to have the immensely talented action veteran Ryota Suzuki join our team, that has seen our development progress, just from the battle systems to the animation and everything that he's pretty much touched his hands on, transformed and become something beyond what we believed it could have been. We're really, really happy to have him, and we're blessed. Oh, that's really good to know. Honestly, yeah. So, someone like Ryota Suzuki on the team, I'm happy with what the combat system's turning out to be. I'm sure it'll be just as satisfying as the games he's worked on. And God, I implore you guys, play the Devil May Cry games. Seriously, they're so fun. They are so fun. Maybe not the deep stories that you'll get from Final Fantasy, but nonetheless, they are so, like, I would describe them like this. It's the same kind of satisfaction you'd get from playing an old arcade style game that just kept track of your scores and just wanted you to rack up more points to get a higher score. That's how it's really like. That's what those games are really like. Especially the Devil May Cry games. Oh my god. It's basically like, just make your character OP and get the highest score you can get from each mission. That's basically it. So, moving on. The next story I want to interview I want to get to is from GamesRadar, and this is where they specifically ask YoshiP about the companions. Pretty interesting what he says about this. So this is what GamesRadar writes. With the battle system moving away from the command-based format we've come to know from the past games, one aspect of the combat has really stood out, the fact that Clive appeared to be fighting alone. Historically, Final Fantasy games have featured a party system, allowing us to take control of multiple characters in combat and tweak their loadouts, items, and abilities in the menus. The Dominance trailer is heavily focused on Clive, so much so that we started to wonder whether Final Fantasy 16 would be more of a solitary affair. Yoshida-san tells us that given the amount of information presented in the trailer, the team was keen to focus on focus a lot on Clive's battles and on his role in the battle to avoid, to avoid any unnecessary confusion. However, Final Fantasy XVI's producer tells us that Clive will not be alone in this journey. He may be the character that we principally control, but there will be AI-driven companions joining you on your adventure throughout Valisthea and assisting you in combat encounters. Quote from YoshiP, Clive has a massive amount of unique abilities in his fully customizable arsenal. We wanted players to master these and customize these to the point where they can use them fluidly and stylishly. End quote. Yoshida-san continues. But by spreading out battle controls out across multiple party members, it can end up hindering the action or just making things more complicated. And that's why we decided we'd rather have players focus solely on just controlling Clive. And he goes on to say, and so in battle, you have these characters that will be fully AI driven, but that doesn't mean that they will just be there in battle. Yoshida-san continues, there will be party banter, there will be accompanying Clive along this journey, and you'll have party members enter the party and leave the party, and different people come in depending on where you are in the story, and these characters will play big roles in the story, and they will have their own arcs themselves, and so it's not just basically having someone helping you in battle, it's actually having party members that participate in Clive's journey. That is really interesting, wouldn't you say? So, kind of similar to Final Fantasy XII's like guest party members, like Larsa, Redis, and Vossler. That's basically how I'm getting the feeling that how all the companions and party members in Final Fantasy 16 will act like, which I think is pretty interesting. I don't think, like, I'm trying to think, is it really so bad that we get different party members at different points of the game? Like, imagine if, actually I can't really, because it would probably break a Final Fantasy game, aside from like, I don't know, 4 or 7, with like, I kind of don't want to spoil potential players for that, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. But you know which party members don't stick around. Nonetheless, that's kind of old school. That's pretty old school, I would say. Which, like, just going off of what YoshiP has been saying, feels like more going back to the roots of Final Fantasy, which is kind of like a good segue to the next news piece. I'm sorry, I keep screwing this up. Interview, which is from, I believe it's from PlayStation Blog, and it's like the first thing they ask him, actually. Right here. This is PlayStation Blog asking, what do you think are the core tenets of a Final Fantasy game? Did the development team look to past titles in the series for guidance or inspiration when building Final Fantasy 16? Now, in one of my previous videos on Final Fantasy 16, I briefly just kind of like threw away asked. I guess that's something that goes into a deeper conversation about what makes a Final Fantasy game a Final Fantasy game. Yeah, I think it would be a deeper conversation to have about what makes a Final Fantasy game a Final Fantasy game, but I like Naoki Yoshida's answer on this, which he says, I'd say the core elements of a Final Fantasy game are a deep story, deep gameplay, cutting-edge graphics, and cutting-edge sound, as well as chocobos and moogles, of course. That's basically what I'd say. Yeah, I think any fan would basically say that, because that's true. That's what they are. Like I said earlier, when Final Fantasy games, when they're at their best, when you play like a 4 or a 6 or a 9, it's like a Shakespearean experience. Honestly, I don't know how else to put it. It's like, how did people think of things to combine to make this, to come up with a story like this, to come up with music like this, to make it so alive and so fantastical, and so epic. That's what it feels like whenever you play, or that's what it should feel like, I should say. So that's what Final Fantasy is to me, and I imagine to almost every fan. So let's continue on with this. YoshiP continues, in the 35-year history of the Final Fantasy series, it's always been the guiding policy that each new installment has to be the very best game that the director of the time can put together, no matter how the game world, the characters, or the battle system might change. Because of this, gamers and Final Fantasy fans around the world have different ideas of what a Final Fantasy game should be, but to me, it's those elements I mentioned. All this stuff, basically. Yeah. When it came to deciding what to do with Final Fantasy 16, I thought back to when I played the original Final Fantasy and remembered how I felt like I was playing the leading role of in a motion picture. I wanted to recapture that feeling in Final Fantasy 16, but with state-of-the-art game design and the latest in modern technology. The whole development team, under the directorship of Hiroshi Takai, has come together to make that dream a reality, so I hope you all look forward to it. Oh yeah, from what we've seen, I think a lot of people are looking forward to it. And after these interviews, I'm sure a lot of fans, a lot of hardcore fans that were second-guessing this game, that were probably doubting this game, I think YoshiP has basically sold them the Final Fantasy 16 bridge. So that's all I had to say on this. It was a longer video, but hey, I think the content and the information was worth it. So nonetheless, let me know what your thoughts are on this. Did you like what you hear? Did you find it fascinating? Did you basically expect all this? Let me know in the comments down below and let's have a discussion. Also, like, share, subscribe. It'll totally help out and I'd greatly appreciate it. And yeah, see you in the next video. Take care, guys.